going to move us on to the next section of the day. And it's my pleasure to announce that we're going to have a Heritage Hustings. Now, the Heritage Alliance has a proud tradition in election years of asking all the major parties to come up and speak to us about their focus on heritage and what that means. So if I can welcome all of my panelists to the stage, please, to come and join me. We'll be hearing from representatives across the political spectrum to discuss the place of heritage under whichever government comes next. In this session, I'll be chairing, and we'll dig a little deeper into the priorities of each party and explore how best to engage them in an election year. We'll take questions from both the in-person and virtual delegates if we can. And if you're joining us virtually, please follow the online instructions to submit your questions. So I've welcomed my panelists to the stage, and I will start by introducing them. I have with me Baroness Thornton, who is the Shadow Minister for Culture, Media and Sport in the House of Lords. I'll ask each guest to just give a little wave. She's had a career in the voluntary, cooperative, and private sectors for over 40 years. She was chief exec of the Young Foundation and continues to serve as a senior fellow. Formerly government health minister, women and equalities minister. She's also shadow minister for women and equalities. Glenys is the founding chair, patron of Social Enterprise UK, a fellow of social innovation at the Cambridge Centre for Social Innovation. So welcome and thank you very much. Lord McNally, the Right Honourable Lord McNally, member of the Liberal Democrat team for Culture, Media and Sport in the House of Lords. He was previously a member of the House of Lords Select Committee, which investigated the problems facing seaside towns, so you'll be interested in the Minister's announcement today, and recently worked with Baroness Ducey in developing Liberal Democrat policy on tourism. He's a former MP and was created a peer in 1996. And he lives in St Albans, where he's served in the past on the city's museum committee. The Right Honourable Lord Vaizey of Didcot is also a member of the House of Lords, broadcaster and business advisor. He's a former government minister and member of Parliament representing Wantage between 2005 and 2019. He served as the UK Government Culture and Digital Minister from 2010 to 2016. Who is the largest serving minister in... Excellent! He's the largest, I'll just say it again, the longest serving minister to date. Yes, there we go. Well, that's going in the outtakes for sure, Ed, for sure. I doubt that's true. Anyway, look, we'll just move on. And actually, in that period was also my boss, so I've just blotted my copybook rather badly. Apologies for that. Ed published the first white paper in culture in the UK for 50 years in that period, introduced a national museum education program, and established English Heritage as a standalone charity. He has his own weekly show on culture on the Times Radio.
The show's tonight, 7 o'clock.
There you go, the show's tonight, 7 o'clock. So have a listen. Right, I will move on to Philip Nelson, who heads the working group developing heritage and tourism policy for the Green Party. Originally from Norfolk, with a lifelong passion for heritage, he's regularly invited to give talks on his own rich family history in the Norman conquest of World War II. His work within the executive search over past 20 years and as a trustee has provided him with a unique opportunity to work with and support individuals and organizations working to preserve Britain's heritage, using heritage as a lever to raise civic pride and drive economic growth. So could I please ask you all to give a warm welcome to our panelists here today. Fantastic. Now, just a reminder, please, that we'll provide visual descriptions of ourselves today, so maybe the first time you talk, you could just say a little bit about yourself. So I am going to begin by inviting each of you to share in just 2 to 3 minutes the three key strategic priorities for your party in an election year. So 2 to 3 minutes, your 3 key priorities. And because of a slight technical issue with mics today, we are going to be sharing, and I'm just going to hand them down. So apologies for that. So I guess we'll start with you.
Thank you. Philip Nelson, I'm clearly, obviously, the least known member of the panel here today. But heritage and our nation's history is something that I've been passionate about for most of my life, and I give talks across the whole country. Some of my own family's history and background is inspiring. Other parts of it to do with the slave trade is obviously more challenging, but I think the more that we talk about all aspects of our heritage, positive and negative, the better for society as a whole. So this is my first gig as one of the newly appointed spokespeople for heritage at the Green Party. And what I wanted to talk about, first of all, was a little bit more about our approach to policy development, because it's very different to the other political parties. I could talk about our strategic priorities in terms of fiscal responsibility, but any party who's forming the next government, that will be a key part of what they'll be tackling to do. So in terms of our policy development, first of all, in terms of the key pillars, it's all about sustainability, conservation, also community empowerment, and also subjects which obviously resonate quite highly with the audience here. But from a broader policy stance, I think what distinguishes us from the main political parties, and often it's the smaller parties that can do this, because clearly the Green Party aren't going to form the next administration after the general election. It's thinking about, if you look at our work in terms of the economy, we can demonstrate across all four home nations where we've actually influenced policy. In terms of democracy, I don't think hardly anybody in this room would probably agree that first past the post continues to deliver strong and stable governments after what's happened over the last 20 years, but also in terms of the economy and taxation. And I know it's an uncomfortable subject, and the Green Party has often been criticised for our tax policy, but we're the only people talking about a wealth tax, and also we're the only party who've actually published quite details about what we're planning to do. So in terms of heritage, what have I brought to the conversation that's currently taking place within the Green Party? Well, I have over 20 years professional experience working in support of heritage across all four nations, and often working with some of the most deprived and remote communities in the country. Do we have anybody here from Wales? Okay, we have some representation. I don't know how many of you here will have heard of it. Okay, oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. 2 minutes, okay. I've worked with Bruganold in Mid Wales, and also Blackpool as part of the Levelling Up agenda, and experiences which go to demonstrate how heritage can be used in order to influence a whole range of public ills, but also in our policy manifesto to do with heritage, which will be published shortly. You'll see some practical considerations as well. It was obviously good to hear about changes in VAT in the budget yesterday, but more work needs to be done on that. And I probably should stop there because I've run over time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm Glenys Thornton, a member of the House of Lords. I am the Shadow Women in Equalities and also DCMS. We double up on these issues. And I need to first say that Lillian Greenwood would normally have been here. And she sends her huge apologies, and me. I was very interested to see in your Heritage Manifesto 2024 that you have 5 missions at the front, because what I was about to say is the 10-year renewal programme of the Labour Party is around 5 missions, and they're not that different from the ones that you have got here. They are about renewing our economy, they are about net zero strategies, they are about long-term sustainable growth, they are about workforce. And so I'm going to use a minute of my time just to talk about that, about the workforce, because what we want to do is kickstart a skills revolution, including for the heritage sector. A new generation of technical excellence colleges offering high quality apprenticeships and training tailored for local jobs in local communities. So your role in this is absolutely vital. Green skills we want to have at the heart of our sustainable future, because we know that there currently are not enough green skills in our economy to reach our net zero targets. Your role in this is vital because you are the people who sustain many of the places where we will need to focus on our net zero. And then finally, we want to make our apprenticeship schemes work better for the heritage sector through our growth and skills levy. So that's just one focus. I think that's a really important focus, talking to people who work in this sector. They have found the bureaucracy and, lack of accessibility for these issues a real barrier to being able to play the role that I know all of you want to play in revitalising and renewing our economy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So we're trained to do 2 minutes.
My name is Tom McNally. I'm a Liberal Democrat peer. I'm 81 years old, so those who are not seeing me will imagine I am grey-haired, still reasonably erect, creaking at mean parts, and as Lord Vaizey has just reminded us, in fact, all three of us are part of that living heritage which is known as the House of Lords.
Lord Vaizey is a big part of that living.
Harold Wilson was once making a speech in which he said, "And why do I talk about the Navy?" And a voice from the crowd said, "Because you're in Chatham." And so there is a nature of politicians to immediately tell you that their lifelong love is whatever audience is sitting in front of them. I think, though, I can say that I had my full title is Lord McNally of Blackpool, a name that didn't go on and was checked, not in that list. In the he's too focused on the East Coast, I'm afraid. But one of the interesting things is that Blackpool in 1918. The government allowed local authorities to levy a 6-penny rate for cultural reasons, and Blackpool levelled that 6-penny rate for the illuminations. Not a bad investment, but I was pleased also to note about the. I'm sure Blackpool is already in touch with the department about how to spend the money. What I would say, first of all, I think your manifesto is great and will engage all of us. It's your job to engage them. There is a long queue for what to spend and how to spend it, so I'll not immediately tell you that it's all easy, but I think it's possible. The other thing that I would say a very strong part of Lib Dem policy is regionalism and localism. To get the decision-making, particularly on heritage, to the localities. They need the money, they need the help, but the pace-making of deciding what's to be done and how it's to be done, the better, more local. I realise we're on the time strain, so I'll not go any further than that, but to pass over to Lord Vaizey, who again, for the visually impaired, is indeed a larger-than-life figure.
Right, so I'm now in the same category as Keir Starmer. And I would remind you that the Labour Health spokesman has come out against fat shaming. So I might have to vote Labour now. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm not actually a Conservative government spokesman. I do take the Conservative whip, although the Conservatives do try their best to take it away from me on occasions. So I'm not going to give you a Tory manifesto pledge. And anyway, you've had the Heritage Minister give a 15-minute speech anyway, so you know what the Tory policy is. But I would say that my first policy in the new Conservative government after the election would be to reappoint Stephen Parkinson. I think he's a very promising young man. of great talent, and I think he's come on in leaps and bounds. He's very flexible. He can do the Online Safety Act, he can do the Media Bill, he can do heritage, he can do art, but I think he's a very good minister. Secondly, since I'm not the spokesman, I'll just reflect a bit on my brief time as the largest arts minister, heritage minister, and say a few fatuous truisms. First of all, the sort of Joni Mitchell line, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. There are countries around the world looking at their tourism strategy, their cultural strategies. They don't have anything compared to what we have. We are unbelievably lucky as a country in terms of our heritage and our heritage assets, if I can use that slightly clunky phrase, and many countries would kill for them. So we do need to invest in them. They're not only obviously very important for our communities and our history and our heritage, they are a very important part of our economy, particularly, frankly, as the world gets wealthier, more people travel. Tourism, it's essential. You wouldn't need to have to explain that to the French. We shouldn't have to need to explain it to any British government. And in fact, I was reminded of the Joni Mitchell line when I looked at the Notre Dame exhibition in Westminster Abbey, and the man taking me around, who's done this sort of 3D tour, said, you know, when Notre Dame was trying to get money out of the government to restore for £100 million, they couldn't get any money from anyone. The minute it burnt down, they raised £850 million from the public and from 3 big French companies, because the French population obviously realised how important Notre Dame was for their national identity. So that would be my first message. The second message is the sort of, again, a bit fatuous and trite, and everyone says it all the time, joined up policy. There's lots going on in the heritage world. Stephen talked a lot about it in his speech. There needs to be a sort of greater holistic approach to how we work between heritage, between tourism, between levelling up, between education, between health. There are all sorts of aspects to heritage which needs some kind of overarching narrative, if I can put it that way. The third point, and another fatuous point, is simply about funding. I think we are very lucky in this country. People always forget, you know, that the lottery is still a relatively recent invention, given that it happened in my lifetime. You know, we have had halcyon days because of lottery funding, which perhaps we've become complacent about, but nevertheless, I do feel very passionately about arts funding and heritage funding, that it's a rounding error on government spending, and we could put it on a secure, much more secure footing. I had to fight the Treasury for tiny pots of money from odd schemes to get funding for cathedrals, for example, which I just think was a nonsense. So those are my kind of main points.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody. And I'm going to move over here just so that the mic is a bit more easily shareable. So I'm going to kick off with an initial question, and then we're going to open it up to the floor. So online and in the room, please think about what you want to ask. So I'm just going to start with thinking about the planning system, actually. And this year, of course, we've seen significant changes in planning policy. We've seen the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill passed. We've talked about statutory historic environment records, and there's currently a consultation out on permitted development rights, including permitted development rights for demolition. So I'd like to know, is your party committed to seeing these positive heritage policies through? And what else would you like to see changed in the planning space? And perhaps I will start with Baroness Thornton, because Labour's been quite vocal about planning.
Yeah, we have got a commitment to planning reform, and we have already had many discussions and consultations with many of you about how to champion the voices of heritage sector in those conversations, which will take place across departments and in localities. So we want to work with local authorities to quickly draw up and agree local plans that have stalled. Recruiting, and we are committed to, and I can say this with permission of the Shadow Chancellor, to recruiting hundreds of extra planners in a sprint to agree new plans that have been announced. We also have a plan for a next generation of new towns, because of course housing is absolutely crucial, as everybody knows, across all our communities. But we have to make sure that those are beautiful homes, green spaces, reliable transport, and heritage assets will be absolutely vital to revitalising those economies. So, and then finally, I would say that we are determined to devolve to regional mayors a package which will give them stronger powers over planning and control over housing investments. So their relationships with you at local and regional level will be absolutely vital. I'm from Bradford in Yorkshire, and we know that Tracy Brabin, our West Yorkshire Mayor, is absolutely onto this and central to what happens in my home area of West Yorkshire. And I feel really very optimistic were we lucky enough to be elected and to be in charge of this area, that we will be able to make great progress. But your collaboration and involvement is vital.
Thank you very much. Would another of my panelists like to come in?
The planning system in this country is completely screwed, and it's a disaster in terms of housing. But weirdly, I think heritage can play a role in planning, or maybe it's not weird, maybe it's screamingly obvious to this audience, in terms of bringing communities with you. I used to have a lot of housing applications in my constituency, which obviously people hated. But I brought Terry Farrell to the constituency, an uncompromisingly modern architect. But he went to Wallingford, you know, Saxon settlement, medieval street pattern, and talked to the community about how Wallingford had developed and how the villages around Wallingford were a result of the marshes that used to be around Wallingford. And he explained where you could put housing that respected the vernacular of Wallingford and respected the organic growth of Wallingford. And people, by the end, were screaming for more houses, not that it happened. So I think heritage professionals should put themselves absolutely at the heart of planning, both in terms of organic development of towns and cities, but also, obviously, the reuse of buildings. I grabbed the microphone partly because I have to leave probably in about 10 or 15 minutes, and I just forgot the most important part of my manifesto, which is to end the culture war and leave the National Trust alone.
Hear, hear.
I think we'll all say amen to that. One of the great, I think, damages of the Thatcher revolution was not the sale of council housing, which was aspirational for many people, but the ban on local authorities being able to reuse the money from sales for replacement and the result is that the fact is that we have a massive shortage of housing for rent and low-income families, and that's part of that, of not thinking of policy, or perhaps thinking of policy through in ideological terms. I think that's the only controversial thing I would say in party political terms, but I think we're still trying to mop up, because successive governments under all parties have miserably failed to build sufficient housing. When you think that Harold Macmillan made his name in the early 50s by being the housing minister that builds 300,000 houses in a year, would the next housing minister did the best. But I also know from various other experiences, I was once on the retail, director of the retail consortium. I just know how our planning laws can be screwed up, delayed, held, etc. And so simplification is good. I have experience in both ends. I still keep my contacts with the Files Coast where I was born, but I now live in St Albans, and you know the difference there is the price of land and the care for the green belt. So there are no easy solutions, but unless we address the problem of housing in its broadest sense, we are not going to move forward socially, because it leaves a great problem for everybody, from young singles to large poor families.
Thank you.
I'd just like to add a very brief note to what's already been said, and that's in relation to heritage protection. And we've had, as the Minister talked about, the Crooked House pub. But how many people here honestly believe that the Crooked House pub is going to be rebuilt in 3 years' time. And I think we need to think about heritage protection more broadly in terms of ancient scheduled monuments and other historic buildings which might be uneconomical to repurpose for a new use, but potentially might be lost if they're not redeveloped at all. So I just wanted to add that as a brief note.
Thank you. Now look, I'm going to turn to you guys on the floor. If some of you have a question, I've got a hand at the back there. So let's get going. And I'm going to ask my panelists for sort of quick fire responses, and we'll try and get through as quickly as possible a bunch of questions. All right.
We've only got the one mic, so the panelists will have to come up here.
Okay, so apparently we're going to have to ask, how is that going to work? Okay.
Come up here, who are going to answer the question.
Okay, so apparently we only... I can't believe this. So we have one mic. It's now gone there. So you guys get to come here when you want to answer. I am really sorry about that. Or just, what if we talk really loudly?
Behind you.
All right, let's get a question answered.
Hi there, thanks. I'm William Heath from Bath. So at Vaizey, you said that some countries would kill for some of the heritage that we have in the UK. Is it fair to say that we did that?
Having asked at the end of the culture war, that first question is not. I mean, look, I think it's very important that we have a debate about how some of our heritage, how some of our historic houses were built, where the money came from. And Britain's history, which is nuanced and complex, and that's why I completely applaud what the National Trust is doing in terms of understanding the history behind some of its houses, and I deplore people simply wanting to shut down this debate and somehow saying it is un-British. So it's a perfectly fair question to ask. I may slip off during this debate. I just wanted to say to Ingrid, you never worked for me. I want to say thank you to the people I worked for, who I haven't seen for a while. Ingrid, Lizzie, Roy, Claudia, and no doubt some others.
Fantastic. Does anybody else want to come in?
I agree with Ed.
Excellent.
I mean, in the House of Lords, we do go in for cross-party agreement, but I think he's absolutely right about this.
Fantastic. You know what? New plan. If you have a question and I call on you, just stand up and speak as loudly as you can. I'm going to leave the mic up here. So at the back there, please.
Hi, I'm Rachel Sutcliffe from the Society for the Transformation of Buildings. My question is about embodied carbon. Can you hear me?
Embodied carbon. We got you.
Sorry to make you I'm Rachel Sutcliffe from the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings, or one of the National Unity Societies. My question is about embodied carbon. You might see the case of the M&S department store, which M&S wants to rip down on Oxford Street in order to rebuild a more sustainable building. So all of us in the heritage sector, I think, there's a kind of ludicrous nature to that, because we always say the biggest building is the one that already exists. So my question is, would your party legislate about the value of embodied carbon when we're weighing our sustainability as a factor in how we look after our heritage?
I think you probably know what my response is going to be already, and I've got friends across all political parties, and I've got a lot of respect for Michael Gove in terms of what he's doing as part of the Levelling Up agenda, and also in terms of this particular court case. But bearing in mind that 80% of buildings that are in existence today will be in existence in 2050, I think it was rather a perverse judgment, and it just goes to show in terms of how legislation needs to be tightened up.
One point, I'm at the moment, I chair a small charity in Fleetwood, which is trying to restore what was then the derelict Fleetwood Hospital for community use. And we got a visit from and an accolade from REBA, from the Royal Society of British Architects, about this, something I'd not thought that we were doing, but making the point that there is an alternative to demolition and rebuild, which is increasingly important in the battle for achieving net zero, for exactly the same reasons that you pointed out. So I think this is something that has to be taken more and more into account when agreeing at demolition. The other thing that, though, I will remember, I did some work 20 years ago for the Corporation of London, and they had a big exhibition at the Mansion House of the buildings in the square mile. And what always sticks in my mind was that you think of the City of London as never changing and narrow alleys and old buildings, but the vast majority of the City of London is new build. And it's always that balance between renewal, restoration, and reuse.
I think this is one of those questions where Tom's right. About a month ago, I was in the Royal Festival Hall, and the discussion there is that here is this building which is almost all glass, and none of it is double glazed or anything. It leaks, it heats the South Bank, and will, of course, cost a great deal of money to do anything about that. And there we have many, many buildings like that in the UK, and so it is an enormous challenge. So this is not about legislation necessarily. It might well be about how, over quite a long period of time, because these things cannot be done quickly, and I'm not going to make any financial commitments, that we've got a big challenge, not just in the buildings that we want to preserve, but the buildings that we need to build, and the buildings that we need that are new buildings, relatively speaking, like the Royal Festival Hall, that we need to work out what on earth we're going to do and how we're going to manage that as well. That's called a politician's answer.
Thank you. You all right? Okay. Look, I have Ed.
A non-politician's answer.
A non-politician's answer.
No, I'm going to give you a politician's answer because I agree with everyone. So just very quickly, I think it's a really interesting question. I don't quite know why M&S has got the bit between its teeth about this, so I think there may be two sides to the argument. It's possible to save a building that looks like it's completely knackered. And one of the decisions I took as a minister, which I was thoroughly pleased about, was to list Preston Bus Station, which has now become a kind of iconic building in the town. But one shouldn't be precious about this. I shed no tears over the demolition of Birmingham Library and its replacement by a new structure, for example, as part of the kind of remodelling of the centre of Birmingham. So it brings up 2 points. One is carbon pricing and so on. 3 points. Carbon pricing is a factor in looking at the cost-benefit analysis. The canard of VAT on repairs, which none of us touched on, which is a sort of Gordian knot that's almost untiable. But also the heritage sector itself being flexible. One should never have a heritage sector that is simply this must be preserved, come what may. One has to be flexible and work with people.
Thank you very much. Yep, fantastic. I do have an online question. This may be our last question just due to time, but it's an equally important one. So the question is, historic civic buildings are significantly deteriorating because of the worrying financial position that too many councils currently find themselves in. What will you do to support local authorities and local heritage?
I'll have a first go because I was a member for... No, do you want to say that? No. I will indeed. I will take over all responsibility for anything that Ed Vaizey has done in the past.
Thank you very much, Lord Vaizey.
Thanks, Ed. No, I was Member of Parliament for Stockport, and Stockport's town hall is modelled on, is a smaller replica of Belfast City Hall. You must have gone and have a look at it, Minister. But it is, you can imagine the city fathers of Stockport in its cotton heyday saying, aye, right, we'll have marble, lots and lots of marble and indeed they do. And particularly in our great northern cities, their town halls and their railway stations and other public buildings are symbols of that prosperity. But they are extremely difficult to maintain. But I think that's where heritage does matter. It does matter that we maintain, where we can, some of that great civic building, which is a symbol of those towns and cities. I agree, by the way, what Ed said as well. I think Birmingham gained by the new library, but there always is a tendency to see the new as rather brutal, as indeed was made of the criticism of the South Bank when it was made.
That's true, and Birmingham is significantly better, central Birmingham now, than it was 20 years ago. But of course it is also, as we know, in very deep financial trouble. And if the crossbridge is probably about to break down now, because I am going to say that our councils, and they're not across the political spectrum, are stuck in a kind of Tory doom loop of financial crisis. This is going to, we're under no illusion if we are in government about the scale of the problems that we are going to inherit. There's no magic wand here. We've got a long, hard slog with councils to rebuild it from the ground up to deliver the services that our local people need. And the heritage sector is a very important. I'm aware that terrible damage is being done right now in local government because of the cuts that they are bound to make. We are going to be asking a lot of local government, as we are of the heritage sector. But in return, we will bring stability, and we will bring greater certainty, and we'll stop the sticking plaster approach of this government. So integrated long-term funding settlements to local leaders, giving them greater certainty and ability to plan. Those are the things that we promise over the periods of a Labour government and a second term, because we know that we have a lot of rebuilding to do.
I'd just like to add a footnote to that. I think that the value of investment in heritage hasn't always been properly recognised. And for every pound that's invested in heritage, whether it's economic, environmental or social, we know that we get higher rates of return than in most other sectors. I think also if we look at local authority funding, local authorities for the considerable future are actually going to find it difficult actually funding the statutory responsibilities that they have. So rather than thinking that we can wave a magic wand and suddenly our local authorities and mayor's offices are going to have this funding, we need to think more strategically. And one example that I'll throw out there to you, which most of you probably potentially don't know an awful lot about, I would urge you to Google the Mid-Wales growth deal and see the impact that that's having in potentially one of the most remote and deprived areas of Wales. And that could serve as potentially a template.
Thank you very much, Philip, and that gave you the last word, so thank you for that. And I want to say thank you to all of my panelists and to Lord Vaizey for your participation today. We've actually had a fairly hard-hitting conversation around planning, around culture wars, around demolition and crippling local funding challenges. So lots of stuff that's important and challenging for all of us today. So thank you for your honesty and your responses and your insights. And I hope the rest of you really enjoyed listening to that and will give you something to think about.